They say a broken heart builds character. Personally, I think it just builds a better cryptocurrency portfolio. It was a Tuesday afternoon in Miami, the kind of blindingly sunny, humid day that made you want to do absolutely nothing. Which was perfect, because doing absolutely nothing was my current full-time profession. I was lying horizontally on my custom Italian leather sofa, popping sour gummy worms into my mouth while watching my Bitcoin wallet inflate on the massive flat-screen TV. Somewhere on the dark web, I was known as an elusive genius, the primary supplier of the most potent, highest-grade synthetic suppressants on the black market. In reality, I was just Riley Brooks, a 23-year-old Omega who had realized that monopolizing illegal chemistry was vastly more lucrative than crying over my exes. Why wallow in self-pity when you could get ridiculously rich from your couch? A soft, menacing growl brought my attention to the plush Persian rug. Max, my 5-month-old son, was currently engaged in a vicious death match with a limited edition Gucci teething ring. He had Chase's untamed, reckless energy, Wyatt's brooding green eyes, and Hunter's absolute, terrifying zero-tolerance policy for being told no. Whenever he got genuinely mad, his chubby little arms sprouted a thin layer of silvery wolf fur. He was a complete menace to society. I adored him. The peaceful silence of my penthouse was suddenly shattered by the obnoxious, high-pitched chime of my encrypted tablet. I groaned, reaching for it with lazy fingers. It was an official, heavily sealed digital summons from the Aspen Pack Court. Emergency mandate. The subject line read in bold red letters. I rolled my eyes, chewing on a green gummy worm as I opened the PDF. Require Omega Riley Brooks to return to Aspen territory immediately. The royal bond is in critical deterioration. The lives of the Alpha Kings are in imminent danger. I stared at the glowing screen, the gummy worm suspended halfway to my mouth. Imminent danger, dying. 6 months ago, when I walked out of that frozen hellscape of a mansion after discovering our entire relationship was seemingly built on a political lie, I thought the bond breaking would kill me. It almost did. The fever, the physical agony of a fraying royal tether, it was a nightmare. But I survived. I synthesized my own cure and moved to the beach. Now, the backlash was coming for them. My chest tightened slightly, a phantom, treacherous tug of a tether I had tried to burn to ashes. But the old Riley, the one who would have panicked, who would have rushed blindly back into the snow to save them, died the day I walked out. Now I just wanted to be petty. I tossed the tablet onto the glass coffee table, picked up my phone, and dialed a number I had saved explicitly for emergencies of the aesthetic variety. Chad, I purred when the line connected. Hey babe, a deep, slightly vacant voice rumbled back over a heavy gym baseline. Chad was a local Miami fitness model. He had the IQ of a protein shaker, but his abs looked like they had been personally hand-sculpted by Michelangelo. How would you like to make $500 an hour, all expenses paid, to take a little trip to the snow with me? What do I gotta do? Chad asked, the sound of clanking weights in the background. Hold my baby, wear tight shirts, look pretty, and act like you're madly in love with me in front of 3 very dangerous, very territorial alphas. There was a pause. Bro, that sounds intense. Do I get dental if they hit me? I'll buy you a whole new set of veneers if they so much as breathe on you wrong. Deal. Deal. Fast forward 48 hours. The transition from Miami's humid, golden embrace to Aspen's biting, unforgiving frost was jarring. The black SUV I'd chartered wound its way up the mountain, the heavy tires crunching over fresh snow until we finally pulled up to the imposing wrought iron gates of the Sterling Pack House. It looked exactly the same, a mass, brooding fortress of stone glass and dark wood, a mausoleum of my past mistakes. Remember the plan? I murmured to Chad as the driver killed the engine. Chad nodded enthusiastically, flexing his biceps under a cashmere sweater that was definitely 2 sizes too small. He grabbed the baby carrier holding a thoroughly bundled up, sleeping Max. I took a deep breath, slipped on my oversized Prada sunglasses to hide any traitorous flicker of emotion, and pushed the heavy car door open. The freezing mountain air hit me like a physical slap, but I didn't flinch. I stepped out, my designer boots sinking perfectly into the pristine snow. And there they were, waiting on the grand stone porch. Hunter, standing tall and rigid in a custom Tom Ford overcoat, his jaw clenched so tight it looked ready to snap under the pressure. Chase, pacing like a caged predator, his breath pluming in the icy air, his dark eyes wild and desperate, and Wyatt, leaning heavily against a pillar in his signature worn flannel, looking completely hollowed out, staring at me like I was an apparition. They looked terrible, exhausted, pale, hanging on by a thread. Seeing them like this sent a sharp, Involuntary ache straight through my chest, but I locked it away behind my sunglasses. Their eyes locked onto me, a collective wave of overwhelming relief washing over their devastated features. They took a synchronized step forward until the other side of the SUV opened. Chad stepped out, 6'3" of pure, unadulterated Miami beefcake, holding my son securely against his massive chest. I sauntered over, linking my arm casually through Chad's, leaning my head affectionately against his bicep. The temperature on the porch seemed to instantly drop another 20 degrees. 3 pairs of alpha eyes shifted violently from me, to the baby carrier, and finally to the towering beta whose arm was now wrapped securely around my waist. The fragile relief on their faces vanished in a millisecond, replaced by an earth-shattering, suffocating wave of pure, homicidal shock. The air grew thick with the sudden, aggressive spike of ash cedar and storm pheromones. I pushed my Prada sunglasses down the bridge of my nose, flashing the 3 deadliest men in Colorado a sweet, razor-sharp smile. "Hey boys," I drawled, thoroughly enjoying the sheer panic in their eyes. "Miss me?" The silence on the porch was so absolute you could actually hear individual snowflakes hitting the stone. For a solid 10 seconds, the 3 most powerful alphas in Colorado were entirely rebooting their cognitive functions. Their eyes gray dark brown and piercing green were collectively locked onto the baby carrier strapped to Chad's chest. I watched their nostrils flare. They were taking in the scent, my scent obviously. But underneath the lavender and vanilla of my pheromones was something else, a complex, undeniable cocktail of ash cedar, an impending storm. Max smelled exactly like them, because, genetically speaking, he was them. "Riley," Hunter started, his voice a low, dangerous gravel that used to make my knees weak. Now, it just made me want to order room service. "Whose child is that?" "Mine," I said breezily, tapping a manicured fingernail against Chad's bulging bicep. "And Chad's." "Emotionally speaking, of course. Chad's been a phenomenal stepfather, haven't you, babe?" Chad swallowed hard. The Adam's apple in his thick neck bobbed up and down like a distressed buoy. The sheer, suffocating weight of 3 royal alphas unleashing their territorial pheromones was enough to make a lesser beta pass out. But Chad was a professional, and I had already sent him a $1,000 deposit. Yeah, Chad squeaked, then cleared his throat to lower his voice an octave. "Yeah, bro, I mean babe. Love the little guy. We do tummy time together." Chase looked like he was about to physically spontaneously combust. A low, guttural snarl ripped from his chest, his hands curling into fists so tight his knuckles bled white. "I'll kill him. I'll rip his actual head off." "Chase, stop," Wyatt intervened, grabbing his brother's arm. The Wyatt's own eyes were wide-haunted and fixed entirely on the sleeping baby. He looked back up at me, his voice trembling. He's ours. You had our babies." "I had my baby," I corrected smoothly, stepping past them and walking through the grand mahogany doors into the foyer. "It just so happens he shares a few of your genetic flaws. Now, is it dinner time? The mountain air makes me ravenous, and Chad needs his macros." Dinner was a battlefield masquerading as a high society meal. Martha, the pack's terrifying 50-year-old housekeeper, was the only one entirely unfazed. She served the medium-rare filet mignon with the practiced indifference of a woman who had seen these 3 alphas throw temper tantrums since they were toddlers. She did, however, give Chad an extra scoop of mashed potatoes with a look of profound pity. I sprawled out on my velvet dining chair, effectively ignoring the suffocating tension in the room. I didn't even bother picking up my knife. I just nudged my plate toward Chad. "Cut it for me, sweetie," I murmured. "My wrists are tired from the flight." Chad, sweating so profusely he looked like he'd just finished a triathlon, obediently picked up his knife and fork. His hands were shaking so badly the silverware clinked against the porcelain. "This is a pack matter," Hunter finally snapped, slamming his palm onto the long mahogany table. The crystal wine glasses shuddered. He fixed Chad with a lethal, dominating glare. "The beta leaves now." "The beta stays," I replied, taking a sip of my sparkling water. "He cuts my meat. He also gives excellent foot rubs. Unless you're volunteering, Hunter, I suggest you lower your voice. You're ruining my digestion." "He smells like cheap protein powder and desperation," Chase snarled, gripping his steak knife like he was contemplating plunging it into Chad's perfectly sculpted chest. "And you smell like poor communication skills and emotional unavailability, Chase," I fired back without missing a beat. "At least his protein powder is vanilla flavored. Besides, you have the stamina of a caffeinated squirrel. Don't act tough just because you drive fast cars." Wyatt winced. Chase's jaw dropped in sheer, unadulterated outrage. Riley, please, Wyatt said, leaning forward. He was always the psychological one, the one who tried to play the gentle manipulator. You're projecting your hurt onto this surrogate. You brought him here to punish us. We understand. But we need to talk about the bond. About the baby, about us. I rolled my eyes so hard I saw the ceiling fresco. Wyatt, you wear the same flannel shirt for 3 days straight. Please do not psychoanalyze my life choices. I brought Chad because he remembers to warm Max's formula to exactly 98.6 degrees. Can any of you do that? Do you even know how to hold a baby without treating it like a strategic asset? Silence fell over the table, heavy, brutal, and humiliating. Here you go, babes, Chad whispered, practically trembling as he held up a fork with a perfectly cut piece of steak. I smiled warmly, leaning forward to take the bite right off his fork. Thanks, honey. You're doing great. Hunter looked away, his jaw working furiously as he tried to contain his breaking control. I could see the bags under his eyes, the pallor of his skin. The royal bond was fraying, poisoning them from the inside out because I had completely severed my emotional tether to them. They were quite literally dying of a broken heart. And yet, watching them squirm was infinitely more satisfying than I thought it would be. Suddenly a loud, angry squeak erupted from the baby carrier resting on the armchair next to me. Max was awake, and he was not happy about the yelling. Oh look, I said lazily. You woke him. Hunter immediately stood up, his alpha instincts overriding everything else. Let me see him, he demanded softly, stepping toward the carrier. Riley, let me. I wouldn't do that if I were you, I warned, taking another bite of steak. Hunter ignored me. He reached his large, scarred hand toward the carrier. Hey there, little. Snap. In the blink of an eye, the chubby, green-eyed baby vanished. In his place was a tiny, silvery gray wolf pup. Max let out a vicious, high-pitched growl and lunged. His razor-sharp little puppy teeth clamped directly onto the hem of Hunter's custom Tom Ford trousers. Hunter froze, completely bewildered as his tiny son viciously tugged at his expensive wool pants, growling like a demonic fluffball. He hates loud noises, I supplied unhelpfully. And authority figures. Jason Wyatt stared in absolute shock at the tiny wolf. Before Hunter could even figure out how to safely detach his son without hurting him, Max let go, gave a triumphant little sneeze, and scrambled out of the carrier. He didn't go to Hunter. He didn't go to Chase or Wyatt. The tiny wolf pup trotted straight over to Chad, hopped onto his massive sneaker, and began pawing at his leg to be picked up. Chad, terrified but obliging, scooped the tiny wolf up. Max immediately curled into a silvery ball against Chad's massive bicep, let out a soft sigh, and went right back to sleep. I looked across the table at the 3 alpha kings. They looked like they had just been collectively hit by a freight train. The ultimate insult hadn't come from me. It had come from their own son, who had just chosen a hired gym bro over his biological father's. I dabbed my mouth with a silk napkin, hiding a victorious smirk. Well, I said, pushing my chair back. If you boys are done being thoroughly humiliated for one evening, Chad and I are going to retire to the guest suite. We need our beauty sleep. I spent the next morning exactly how I intended to spend the rest of my life, lying completely horizontal in front of a roaring fireplace, wrapped in a vicuña wool blanket that cost more than Chad's entire acting career. Max was currently napping on my chest in his wolf form, a tiny, warm ball of silver fluff that occasionally let out a soft, adorable snore. Chad was sitting on the floor beside the sofa, diligently peeling green grapes and feeding them to me one by one. It was paradise. Naturally, Hunter had to ruin it. The heavy double doors of the drawing room swung open, and all 3 alphas marched in. They looked slightly more put together than yesterday, Hunter in a crisp suit, Jason a tight black turtleneck, and Wyatt in a slightly less ragged flannel, but the dark circles under their eyes betrayed the agonizing toll the fraying bond was taking on their bodies. Riley, Hunter announced, his voice carrying that infuriating CEO of the universe tone. We need to talk. Without the hired help. Chad stays. I mumbled around a grape. He's my emotional support himbo. Chad puffed out his chest, completely missing the insult. Yeah, bro. Emotional support. Hunter's eye twitched violently. He walked over, towering above my sofa, projecting a wave of dominance. Icy cedar pheromones meant to force a submissive reaction out of my omega biology. 6 months ago, I would have caved now. I just pulled my blanket a little higher. Let's be practical, Riley, Hunter said, his voice lowering into a deadly, serious register. You're an omega. A single parent. You've been surviving in Miami, but we both know that won't last. The royal bond is deteriorating. It's killing us, and eventually, it will start affecting you and Max. But we have a solution." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, do tell." Jace crossed his arms, looking smug despite his exhaustion. "We've secured a continuous supply of the highest grade synthetic suppressants in the world. They're incredibly rare, exclusively sold on the dark web by a syndicate called Etherius. It's costing us millions, but it's keeping the bond's physical backlash at bay." Wyatt stepped forward, his tone softer, more pleading. "We can protect you, Riley. We have the resources, the money, the medicine. We can keep you and Max safe. But you have to drop this ridiculous act. You have to send him." He gestured distastefully at Chad away. "You need us." I stopped chewing. I looked at Hunter's authoritative stance, Chase's arrogant smirk, and Wyatt's desperate savior complex. They really thought they had me cornered. They really thought they were the mighty Alpha Kings offering salvation to the helpless, destitute Omega. I couldn't help it. I started to laugh. It wasn't a bitter laugh. It was a genuine, full-bellied peal of laughter that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Max stirred on my chest, letting out a confused little yip. Chad looked terrified, probably wondering if I was having a psychotic break. "I'm sorry," I gasped, wiping a tear of mirth from the corner of my eye. "You're buying from Etherius Synthetics. The Formula 409X compound, blue liquid, tastes faintly of synthetic lavender." Hunter frowned, his dominant aura faltering. "How do you know the exact compound details?" I didn't answer immediately. I lazily reached under my expensive blanket, pulled out my custom gold-plated tablet, and tapped the screen a few times. I unlocked my encrypted crypto wallet and swiped to open the master backend dashboard of the dark web's most lucrative pharmaceutical empire. I nonchalantly tossed the tablet onto the glass coffee table. "Because," I drawled, resting my chin on my hand, "I am Etherius." Silence, absolute, deafening silence. Hunter stared at the screen. Chase blinked, his mouth dropping open. Wyatt looked like someone had just hit him over the head with a sledgehammer. On the screen was the real-time ledger of the Sterling Pack's massive, multi-million-dollar Bitcoin transfers, deposited directly into my personal accounts. Next to it was the chemical structural breakdown of the exact suppressants keeping them alive formulas I had casually invented while watching reality TV in my pajamas. "You've been paying a 400% markup, by the way," I added cheerfully. "I needed to renovate the kitchen in my penthouse. Thanks for funding the Italian marble countertops, boys." The power dynamic in the room shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The mighty Alpha Kings weren't my saviors, they were my most lucrative clients. I wasn't just surviving without them, I was literally holding their lives in the palm of my manicured hand, charging them an exorbitant premium to breathe. Hunter's knees actually buckled a fraction. The color drained from his face as the reality of my independence crashed into him. Chase stared at me with wide, terrified awe, like he was looking at a terrifying deity, and Wyatt dropped to his knees on the rug, his breathing ragged, looking up at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated worship. I smirked, popping another grape into my mouth. "About me needing you. I think you've got the math backwards, sweethearts." Later that night, the mansion was dead quiet. The Alphas had retreated to their wing, presumably to have a collective existential crisis. I was standing in the dimly lit hallway outside the guest suite, wearing my silk pajamas. Chad was towering over me, holding his phone out with a pathetic, trembling pout on his perfectly chiseled face. "Bro," Chad whispered loudly, glancing nervously down the dark corridor. "The guy in the suit, Hunter. He looked at me during dinner like he wanted to manually extract my spine. This is a hazardous work environment. I need hazard pay. My therapist is going to charge me double for this." I rolled my eyes, pulling out my own phone. "Fine, you big baby. $500 bonus for emotional distress. Pull up your digital wallet." Chad beamed, instantly producing his QR code. "You're the best, babe." Beep. The crisp sound of the successful transaction echoed sharply in the quiet hallway. "Pleasure doing business with you," I muttered. "Wait till my boy's back in Miami hear I'm making bank just standing around." Chad froze. His eyes widened to the size of dinner plates, staring at something over my shoulder. I turned around. Standing half-hidden in the shadows of the alcove, wearing his oversized flannel, was Wyatt. His green eyes were fixed on Chad's glowing phone screen, then snapped up to meet mine. He had heard everything. The hazard pay, the transaction, the business deal. The fake boyfriend cover was officially blown. Chad let out a highly undignified whimper, clutching his phone to his chest. "Please don't kill me, bro. I just needed to pay off my jet ski," he squeaked, before turning and sprinting into the guest room, locking the door behind him with a loud click. I stood there in the quiet hallway, face to face with Wyatt. I expected him to yell. I expected him to storm off and tell his brothers so they could finally confront me and regain their pride. Instead, a slow strain, an entirely unhinged smile spread across Wyatt's pale face. The despair in his eyes vanished, replaced by a glint of absolute, terrifying predatory calculation. He didn't say a word. He just pressed a finger to his lips in a shushing motion, winked at me, and stepped back into the shadows. A sudden shiver ran down my spine. The game wasn't over. It had just mutated into something much, much worse. I woke up the next morning fully expecting World War III. Wyatt knew about Chad, which meant he had inevitably run to his brothers, exposing my fake, $500 an hour himbo boyfriend. I had mentally prepared my best, most scathingly indifferent comebacks. I even picked out a particularly luxurious silk robe to wear during the confrontation, just to emphasize how little I cared. But when I padded barefoot into the grand living room, there was no screaming. There was no alpha posturing or threats of violence. Instead, the atmosphere was weird, deeply, unsettlingly weird. I found Wyatt first. He was sitting on the floor in the corner of the room, far away from the warm fireplace, looking like a discarded Victorian orphan. He was playing with Max, building a little tower out of wooden blocks. But that wasn't the weird part. The weird part was his outfit. He was wearing a ridiculously thin, white Henley shirt that was entirely unbuttoned, exposing a perfectly toned chest marred by several strategic, faintly red scratch marks. "Did you get into a fight with a raccoon?" I asked, raising an eyebrow as I poured myself a cup of imported espresso. Wyatt flinched, looking up at me through his thick lashes with giant, sorrowful green eyes. He let out a soft, tragic sigh. "No. The bond deterioration makes my skin sensitive. I must have scratched myself in my sleep from the stress of loneliness." He looked down, his broad shoulders slumping pitifully. "I just wanted to spend some time with Max before you take him away from me again. I know I don't deserve him. I'm so flawed." I stared at him. He looked like a wounded puppy, a lethal, 6'2" puppy with a psychology degree. I narrowed my eyes. "What game is this?" Before I could interrogate him further, my stomach grumbled. I left Wyatt to his one-man off-Broadway tragedy and headed toward the massive chef's kitchen to find a pastry. As I pushed the swinging door open, I froze. Chase, the adrenaline junkie alpha who regularly crashed multi-million-dollar sports cars for fun, was standing at the kitchen island. He was aggressively chopping a red onion. Tears were streaming down his rugged face, mixing with the flour dusting his cheek. "Chase," I asked, thoroughly disturbed. "Are you crying?" He sniffled loudly, wiping his nose with the back of his massive, tattooed forearm. "No, I wanted to make you a quiche. Because you like quiche." "But I'm so clumsy." He dropped the knife and let out a broken, watery sob. "I bet Chad knows how to chop onions without crying. I bet Chad makes excellent quiche. I'm just a useless, violent brute." I blinked slowly. Chad literally thinks the stove is a decorative shelf. He microwaves frozen chicken breasts. Chase looked at me, his dark eyes brimming with unshed tears of pure, unadulterated self-pity. "You're just saying that to make me feel better." "I'm trying, Riley. I'm really trying to be the domesticated man you deserve." I backed slowly out of the kitchen. This was terrifying. They had completely lost their minds. The chemical imbalance from the failing bond had finally snapped their sanity. I hurried back to the living room, practically diving onto my custom Italian sofa and pulling my vicuña blanket over my head. I needed a minute to process this collective psychotic break. "Riley." A weak, raspy whisper echoed through the room. I peeked over the edge of my blanket. Hunter Sterling, billionaire, ruthless CEO. A man who once bought a rival packing company just to fire their CEO for looking at him wrong. He was staggering into the room, leaning heavily against the doorframe, clutching the fabric over his heart. His usually impeccable suit was slightly rumpled, his tie loosened. He looked devastatingly handsome and devastatingly weak. "Hunter?" I asked, sitting up slightly. He took 2 agonizingly slow steps toward my sofa before his knees buckled. With a dramatic heavy gasp, Hunter collapsed, falling perfectly to the floor so that his broad chest rested right against the edge of my sofa, his face mere inches from my fuzzy slippers. "The bond," he wheezed, looking up at me with silver-gray eyes filled with agony. "It's tearing me apart. But it's okay. You don't have to worry about me, Riley. Focus on Chad, be happy. I'll just suffer quietly down here." He laid his cheek against the rug, letting out a soft, pained groan that vibrated right through the floorboards. Bro, what the actual hell is happening? I looked up. Chad was standing in the doorway, clutching his protein shaker to his chest like a protective shield. He was staring at Hunter's crumpled form, then at Wyatt's tragic orphan act in the corner, and finally at Chase, who had wandered out of the kitchen and was now leaning against the wall, sniffling softly into a dish towel. I don't know, I whispered back. Chad hurried over, crouching behind my sofa. Listen, me. He whispered frantically in my ear. I'm a professional actor, okay? I did a commercial for hemorrhoid cream last year. But I can't compete with this. This is next level toxic theatricality. They're attacking me. They're playing the victim. They're being, what do the kids call it? Green tea bitches. I almost choked on my espresso. He was right. They weren't fighting Chad with alpha dominance. They knew I hated being controlled. So they had completely flipped the script. They were weaponizing their own vulnerability. They were trying to manipulate my omega instincts to care for them by acting as pathetic as physically possible. And the absolute worst part, I looked down at Hunter, whose strong hand was currently clutching the hem of my silk pajama pants like a dying man clinging to a lifeline. It was kind of working. My heart gave a stupid, treacherous little flutter. I wanted to reach down and run my fingers through his dark hair. I wanted to tell Chase his quiche would be fine. I wanted to button Wyatt's shirt and wrap him in a blanket. I aggressively shoved a gummy worm into my mouth to stop myself from doing something stupid. Nice try, boys, I said loudly. But the Oscars aren't until March. Hunter's eye twitched against the rug, breaking character for a fraction of a second. But before he could respond, the heavy, archaic bell of the mansion's front gate chimed loudly. The sound cut through the ridiculous tension like a knife. Martha's brisk footsteps echoed from the foyer. A moment later, the grand doors to the living room swung open. Alphas, Martha announced, her usually stoic face tight with genuine concern. Senator Hayes is here. He has an armed council security detail with him. Hunter's dying act vanished instantly. He pushed himself off the floor with lethal, terrifying speed, his gray eyes flashing with pure alpha fury. Chase dropped the dish towel, his fangs elongating slightly. Wyatt stood up from the corner, pulling Max into his arms protectively. Into the room stepped Senator Hayes, a graying politician wrapped in a thick cashmere coat, flanked by 4 massive, armed guards. Well, Hayes said, his oily gaze sweeping over the room before landing squarely on me. How touching. A family reunion just in time. He pulled a sealed document from his coat. By order of the North American Pack Council, Hayes announced, his voice dripping with malice. Due to the suspected neglect of an Omega, the severe deterioration of a royal bond, and the endangerment of a pureblood heir, the Sterling Pack's territorial rights are hereby suspended, and the child will be taken into council custody immediately. The game was over. The real war had just begun. Take the child, Senator Hayes ordered, his voice echoing with the smug, bureaucratic authority of a man who had never actually fought for anything in his life. 2 of his massive, heavily armed council guards stepped forward, reaching for Wyatt. The reaction was instantaneous. The air in the grand living room didn't just grow heavy, it turned lethal. Chase let out a roar that vibrated the crystal chandelier, his eyes flashing to solid, predatory gold. His claws elongated, ripping right through the sleeves of his shirt. Hunter stepped in front of Wyatt and Max, his massive frame shielding them entirely. The suffocating pressure of Hunter's killing intent was so intense that one of the guards actually stumbled backward, choking on the alpha pheromones. Touch my son, Hunter said, his voice dropping into a register that was less human and more ancient beast. And I will paint this floor with your insides, Hayes. Resisting a council mandate is treason, Hunter Hayes barked, though he prudently took a step behind his remaining guards. You'll be executed, and the Omega will be reassigned anyway. Take the baby. They were going to do it. The Sterlings were going to slaughter a sitting senator and his detail right here in the living room. Consequences be damned. It was tragically romantic, incredibly violent, and completely ruinous for my peaceful retirement plans. I let out a long, theatrical sigh. Chad, I said lazily, holding out my half-empty espresso cup, hold this. Don't spill it on the rug. It's vintage. Chad, who looked like he was one loud noise away from a stress-induced cardiac arrest, took the cup with trembling hands. Yes, babe. I tightened the belt of my silk robe, stepped around the couch, and walked straight into the kill zone between 3 homicidal alpha kings and a corrupt politician. Riley, get back, Chase snarled, his fangs fully bared. Hush, puppy. The adults are talking, I murmured, casually shoving Chase's massive, tense bicep out of my way. I stopped a few feet in front of Senator Hayes, crossing my arms and looking him up and down with an expression of profound, withering disgust. Senator Hayes, I drawled. You look terrible. Is that a stress rash on your neck? Or are your kidneys finally failing from the Apex 9 compound? Hayes froze. The smugness vanished from his greasy face, replaced by a twitch of genuine panic. I don't know what you're talking about, Omega. Step aside. Oh, please. Don't insult my intelligence. It's much higher than your approval ratings, I said, reaching into the deep pocket of my robe and pulling out my gold-plated tablet. I tapped the screen, the bright light illuminating my bored expression. Apex 9. A highly illegal, highly addictive synthetic stimulant used by aging alphas who can't get it up in political debates anymore. Side effects include severe paranoia, liver damage, and a very distinct, ugly red rash right above the collarbone. I pointed a manicured finger right at his neck. How dare you, Hayes sputtered, his face turning the exact shade of a crushed tomato. Seize him. He's delusional. I'm not delusional, Richard. I'm your supplier. I interrupted, my voice slicing through the room like a scalpel. The guards stopped dead in their tracks, Hunter, Chase, and Wyatt stared at my back in absolute, stunned silence. I didn't even look up from my screen as I kept talking. Well, technically, I'm the patent holder of the chemical compound. You buy it through a shell corporation in the Caymans, which funnels the money through 3 different crypto tumblers before it hits a dark web vendor named Etherius. Which is me. I turned the tablet around, showing him a brightly colored, aggressively detailed spreadsheet. This is a comprehensive ledger of every illegal transaction you've made over the last 4 years, I explained cheerfully. It also includes the rather embarrassing medical data you uploaded to the dark web clinic for your performance issues. Now, I have a script running on this tablet. If I press this lovely red button, this entire dossier gets sent directly to the Federal PAC Ethics Committee, the Internal Revenue Service, and, just for fun, the New York Times. Hayes looked like he was going to vomit. His eyes darted from the tablet, to my perfectly calm face, to the 3 lethal alphas standing behind me. You wouldn't, Hayes hissed, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. You go down for selling it. I laughed a cold, sharp sound. I live in a penthouse in Miami, Richard. I have a team of lawyers whose retainers cost more than your entire political campaign. I'll get a slap on the wrist for operating an unlicensed pharmacy. You will get 20 years in a federal penitentiary for high treason, embezzlement, and buying Schedule I narcotics. Do you really want to play a game of mutually assured destruction with a bored, heavily funded Omega? The silence stretched. The threat hung in the air, absolute and undeniable. Hayes swallowed hard. The sweat on his forehead was gleaming in the firelight. He looked at the guards, then back at me. This isn't over, Brooks, he spat, his voice shaking. It is for today, I replied, giving him a sweet, venomous smile. Now get out of my house and wash your neck. It looks highly infectious. Hayes turned on his heel, shoving past his own guards. We're leaving, he barked. Within 30 seconds, the massive front doors slammed shut, and the sound of their vehicles speeding down the driveway faded into the snowstorm. I locked my tablet, letting out a long breath. God, politicians are so exhausting. Next time, Hunter, you can just eat him. It would save me the paperwork. I turned around. Hunter, Chase, and Wyatt were looking at me. They weren't just looking, they were staring at me like I had just descended from the heavens. The alpha aggression was entirely gone, replaced by an overwhelming, suffocating wave of awe, reverence, and desperate, agonizing love. You, Chase whispered, his voice cracking. You protected us. I protected my son. I corrected defensively, crossing my arms. And my investment. You 3 owe me a lot of money for those suppressants. I can't have my best customers going to federal prison. Riley, Hunter murmured. He stepped forward, his gray eyes shining with an emotion so raw it made my chest ache. He didn't care about my sarcasm. He saw right through it. He reached out his large, warm hand hovering just inches from my cheek. You stayed. You fought for us. I opened my mouth to deliver a scathing comeback. I was going to tell him not to flatter himself. I was going to make a joke about Chad. But the words never came out. Instead, a sudden, violently sharp pain ripped through my lower abdomen. I gasped, my vision blurring at the edges. It wasn't just pain, it was fire, a literal, scorching inferno erupting in my veins. My knees buckled instantly. Riley's Hunter caught me before I hit the floor, his strong arms wrapping around my waist. Hey, What's wrong? Chase was there in a second, dropping to his knees beside us. Wyatt handed a crying Max to Chad and rushed over, his hands hovering over me frantically. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. The air in the room suddenly became saturated with an overwhelming, suffocatingly sweet scent. Lavender and vanilla, dialed up to a toxic, concentrated level. My synthetic suppressants. For 6 months, I had been artificially starving the royal bond. I had pushed my omega biology to the absolute breaking point, relying on my genius chemistry to hold back the tide. But the sudden adrenaline spike, combined with being surrounded by the 3 alphas my soul was literally tethered to. It had broken the dam. The suppressants had failed. His temperature is spiking. Wyatt panicked, pressing a cool hand to my burning forehead. It's a crash. A total biological crash. It's his heat, Hunter realized, his voice laced with absolute terror. The bond is tearing itself apart. If we don't stabilize him. Get him to the master suite, Chase yelled. I gripped the lapels of Hunter's suit, my nails digging into the expensive fabric as a whimpering sob tore from my throat. The salted fish was gone. The sarcastic genius was gone. All that was left was an omega, burning alive, desperately needing the 3 men I had sworn to hate. The darkness pulled me under, filled with the scent of ash cedar and storm. Fire. That was the only word my brain could process. My blood felt like it had been replaced with boiling battery acid. Every nerve ending in my body was screaming, stretched so tight I thought I was going to physically shatter into a million pieces. The synthetic suppressants I had engineered to hold back my biology for 6 months hadn't just failed, they had violently rebelled. Through the hazy, scorching fog of my delirium, I heard the sound of frantic footsteps echoing from the hallway outside the master suite. Bro, I can't. I literally cannot. It was Chad. His voice was pitched an octave higher than usual, vibrating with absolute, unadulterated terror. I am an actor. I do fitness supplements and the occasional swimsuit catalog. I do not do whatever the hell kind of werewolf mating apocalypse is happening in there. Keep the hazard pay. Keep the deposit. I'm calling a ride. I don't care if it's snowing. I heard the frantic clicking of a rolling suitcase, followed by the heavy front doors slamming shut in the distance. Even while burning alive, I had to give Chad credit. He knew exactly when to abandon a sinking ship. I groaned, tossing my head against the silk pillowcases. I was in the master suite, our master suite. The massive bed smelled so heavily of ash cedar and storm that it made my head spin. My vision blurred, tears of pure physical agony leaking from the corners of my eyes. The door clicked open, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop, instantly saturated with 3 distinct, heavy alpha presences. My omega biology screamed at me to submit, to beg, to pull them onto the bed and let them extinguish the fire. I arched my back, a pathetic, whimpering sound escaping my throat. But they didn't touch me. Through my tear-soaked lashes, I forced my eyes open. Hunter, Chase, and Wyatt weren't looming over the bed. They weren't using their dominant pheromones to force me into submission. They were on their knees. All 3 of them knelt on the plush carpet beside the massive mahogany bed, keeping a careful, agonizing distance. Instead of aggression, the air filled with the softest, most carefully controlled pheromones I had ever felt. They were projecting pure, unadulterated comfort, a gentle, sweeping wave of calm meant to soothe the raging storm in my veins. Riley, Hunter whispered. The great, untouchable CEO looked entirely wrecked. His suit jacket was gone, his tie discarded. His hands were gripping the edge of the mattress so hard his knuckles were white. He was shaking. We're here. We've got you. Just breathe. It hurts, I gasped, my fingers curling weakly into the bedsheets. The sarcastic armor was completely gone. I couldn't be the untouchable genius right now. I was just broken. Make it stop, please. We can't, Chase said, his voice cracking violently. Tears were openly streaming down the rugged alpha's face. We can fix it right now, Riley. But we won't touch you. Not unless you ask us to. We swear to God, we won't force you into a bond you don't want. The restraint it was taking them to not touch a bonded omega in a critical heat crash was unimaginable. It went against every biological instinct they possessed. But they were doing it for me. The realization hit me harder than the fever. I sobbed, the emotional dam finally breaking. 6 months of resentment, of loneliness, of crying myself to sleep in a multi-million-dollar penthouse poured out. You didn't want me. You chose the Crescent Moon Omega. I saw the contract on your desk, Hunter. I saw her name. Hunter flinched like I had shot him in the chest. I begged you to talk to me, I cried. tossing my head back, the fever making my chest heave. I asked you what was going on, and you stood there and gave me nothing but silence. You replaced me, so why? Why do you care now? Because there was a hit on you, Riley, Wyatt blurted out, his voice a raw, desperate shout. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I looked at Wyatt, whose face was buried in his hands. What? I whispered. Hunter let out a broken, shuddering breath. He slowly reached out, resting his hand on the mattress, inches from my burning fingers but refusing to cross the boundary. 6 months ago, the council deemed you a political liability, Hunter said, his voice thick with tears. They didn't want an Omega from a minor family holding the tether of the 3 most powerful alphas on the continent. Hayes hired an assassin. We intercepted the communication. We panicked, Chase choked out, wiping his face. We knew if we fought the council directly, they would just send someone else. They would keep trying until you were dead. The only way to get them to call off the hit was to make them believe we were casting you aside. The Crescent Moon contract was a ghost, Wyatt added, looking up at me with red, swollen eyes. It was a fake draft, engineered to leak to the council. We were buying time to systematically dismantle Hayes' faction from the inside. Hunter's jaw trembled. I told them we couldn't tell you. I thought if you knew, your reaction wouldn't be genuine, and the council spies would see right through it. I thought I was protecting you. I was an arrogant, stupid, controlling fool. When you found the papers, Chase sobbed. We were under direct surveillance. We couldn't speak. We couldn't explain. And then you left. We tore the city apart looking for you, Wyatt whispered. But you vanished. You hid so well. And every single day, we died a little more. The room fell deadly silent, save for my ragged breathing. The anger, the bitter, cynical shell I had built around my heart for the last 6 months, it began to crack, crumbling into dust. They hadn't replaced me. They hadn't shopped for a better option. They had been trying to keep me alive in the most tragically flawed, idiotically alpha way possible. They were idiots, absolute, colossal idiots. But they were my idiots. Suddenly a tiny, high-pitched whine broke the heavy atmosphere. A small, silvery ball of fur scrambled up the side of the mattress. Max had escaped from wherever Chad had left him. The tiny wolf pup trotted across the enormous bed, completely ignoring the tension in the room. He walked right up to my face, let out a soft whimper, and began gently licking the tears off my burning cheek. I let out a wet, breathless laugh, burying my face into my son's soft fur. The heat was still ravaging my body, but the pain of the broken bond, it was fading, replaced by a terrifying, overwhelming rush of absolute clarity. I looked at the 3 men kneeling beside the bed. They had offered me their empires, their lives, and now, their complete, unvarnished vulnerability. Slowly, fighting the tremors in my arm, I reached out. I bypassed the edge of the mattress. My shaking fingers found the hem of Wyatt's worn flannel shirt. I grabbed it, pulling weakly. Riley, Wyatt breathed, his eyes widening. You're all so stupid, I whispered, the lavender and vanilla of my scent suddenly shifting, blossoming into something sweet, inviting, and entirely yielding. I looked at Hunter, then Chase, and finally Wyatt. Come here, fix it, fix us. The invisible wall shattered. With a collective, desperate sound that was half sob, half growl, the 3 alphas surged forward. The royal bond, starved and fraying for half a year, slammed back into place like a thunderstorm crashing into the ocean. I closed my eyes as the fire consumed us, finally, completely coming home. There was a distinct, unparalleled satisfaction in waking up after surviving a biological apocalypse. My body felt like it had been run over by a freight train, but my mind was gloriously, remarkably clear. The royal bond that had been a fraying, barbed wire tether of agony for 6 months was now a warm, steady hum of golden energy purring right beneath my ribs. It felt like standing in the sun after a lifetime of winter. I stretched my aching limbs across the massive expanse of the master bed. It was empty, though the sheets still carried the heavy, lingering scent of ash cedar and storm mixed with my own thoroughly satisfied lavender and vanilla. I rolled out of bed, my legs wobbling slightly, and grabbed the first piece of clothing I could find. It happened to be Hunter's ridiculously expensive, custom-tailored white dress shirt. It swallowed me whole, slipping off one shoulder and ending halfway down my thighs. Perfect. I padded barefoot down the grand hallway of the Aspen mansion, following the sound of hushed, frantic voices. As I pushed the heavy oak doors to the main living room open, I stopped and leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms to watch the absolute, unmitigated domestic chaos unfolding before me. The great, terrifying Sterling Alpha Kings had officially been domesticated, and it was the funniest thing I had ever seen. In the massive open concept kitchen, Hunter Sterling, billionaire CEO and ruthless pack leader, was staring down a digital baby bottle warmer like it was a hostile corporate takeover. He was wearing sweatpants and a tight black t-shirt, his hair thoroughly ruffled. It says it's at 99 degrees. Hunter growled to himself, glaring at the digital readout. Chad specifically said 98.6. If I give him a 99-degree bottle, it's a biological failure. I have to dump it. I have to start over. Don't dump it, you neurotic control freak. He's crying, Chase shouted from the living room floor. Chase, the adrenaline junkie speed demon, was currently on his hands and knees on the vintage Persian rug. He had a bottle of organic stain remover in one hand and a microfiber cloth in the other. Max, in his tiny silvery wolf form, was happily treating Chase's left ear like a chew toy while Chase desperately tried to scrub baby spit up out of the antique wool. I am not compromising the structural integrity of his digestive system, Chase Hunter barked back, dumping a bottle of imported spring water down the sink to start the formula process entirely from scratch. Wyatt was the first to notice me. He was sitting on my favorite velvet sofa, looking significantly less like a tragic Victorian orphan and more like a man who had finally found religion. His green eyes lit up, the bond pulsing with an overwhelming wave of pure, unfiltered adoration. Riley, Wyatt breathed, standing up quickly. Hunter and Chase froze. Hunter nearly dropped the baby bottle, and Chase completely ignored the fact that Max was now actively gnawing on his hair. 3 pairs of alpha eyes locked onto me, taking in the oversized dress shirt, the messy hair, and the distinct, unmistakable scent of a fully claimed, thoroughly satisfied Omega. The sheer level of devotion radiating from them was almost suffocating. I let out a lazy yawn, stretching my arms over my head before slowly sauntering over to the sofa. Morning, boys, I drawled, dropping face first onto the velvet cushions. Wyatt immediately sprang into action. He grabbed a throw pillow, gently sliding it under my head, before moving to the end of the sofa. He reached for a jar of La Mer body cream sitting on the coffee table. Your legs must be sore, he murmured, his hands warm and gentle as he began to expertly massage my calves. I let out a contented sigh, burying my face in the pillow. You have no idea. Bottles ready, Hunter announced, marching out of the kitchen with the precision of a military general. He scooped the tiny wolf pup off Chase's head. Max instantly shifted back into a chubby, green-eyed baby, grabbing the bottle with greedy little hands. Hunter held him with a terrifyingly gentle reverence, looking down at his son like he was holding the entire universe. Chase scrambled off the floor, throwing the cleaning supplies aside, and collapsed onto the rug right beside my face. He rested his chin on the edge of the sofa cushion, looking at me with big dark eyes. How do you feel? Chase asked softly, brushing a stray lock of hair out of my eyes. Like I could sleep for a decade, I replied, turning my head to look at the 3 of them. The tension, the politics, it was all gone, replaced by a very messy, very real reality. We need to set some ground rules, I announced, my voice muffled by the velvet but carrying absolute authority. All 3 alphas instantly straightened up. Anything, Hunter said without hesitation, burping Max over his broad shoulder. Rule number 1, I said, holding up a finger. No more secrets. If the council breathes in our direction, if someone puts a hit out on me, if a rogue pack challenges the borders, you tell me. I am not a fragile porcelain doll. I am the genius who cornered the dark web pharmaceutical market from his couch. Treat me like a partner, not a liability. Done, Wyatt promised, his thumbs working a particularly stubborn knot out of my ankle. Never again, Riley, we swear. Rule number 2, I continued, holding up a second finger. The alpha patriarchy in this house is officially dead. I am a salted fish. I like my sleep, I like my online shopping, and I do not like stress. Therefore, we are implementing an equitable division of labor, which means you 3 do the labor, and I divide the equity. Chase let out a booming laugh, his eyes crinkling with genuine joy. Yeah, that sounds about right. Hunter gets the night shifts for feeding, I dictated lazily. Chase is responsible for all cleaning duties that involve bodily fluids or destroyed furniture. Wyatt, you're on permanent massage and emotional regulation duty. What about you? Hunter asked a fond, ridiculously soft smile playing on his lips as he rocked Max to sleep. I reached blindly toward the coffee table. Wyatt, anticipating my needs like the perfect servant he was, placed my tablet directly into my outstretched hand. I declared, unlocking the screen. I am going to write Chad a glowing 5-star review on Yelp, and then I am going to order 3 new Prada bags using Hunter's Platinum card to compensate for my emotional distress. Hunter chuckled a deep, rumbling sound that made the bond hum happily. Take 4. You've earned it. I rolled onto my back, propping the tablet on my chest. Sunlight was streaming through the massive windows, lighting up the aspen snow outside. The house was warm. Max was cooing softly in Hunter's arms. Chase was resting his head against my arm, and Wyatt was diligently working the tension out of my muscles. For 6 months, I had thought that running away was the ultimate victory. I thought independence meant isolation. But as I lay there, draped in silk and surrounded by the 3 most powerful, lethal men on the continent who were currently fighting over who got to make me breakfast, I realized I had been wrong. Being an alpha king might come with a crown and a territory. But being an omega with 3 high-end, ridiculously wealthy, hopelessly devoted servants, that was the real empire.